Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next session in Signum Academy's Narnia Camp, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe edition. I'm grateful to everyone who is here joining us live, and hello to everyone who is joining us later. Today we are looking at a very interesting part of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We get to meet for the first time an important character and see how that plays out. So let's just dive in as soon as I get my chat box set up. All right, there we go. All right, so today we'll look at the Knight and the Lion. Let's see if we can all figure out who those are, right? I'm sure that you can. So we have been, so far, journeying towards the stone table to meet Aslan, right? The beavers and the children have been chased by the White Witch, but also moving toward the goal of meeting Aslan at the stone table. Today, we get to see that goal accomplished. We've seen already that Aslan's prophecy is slowly being fulfilled. First, we had Father Christmas come in, and then we had spring start to come, so the witch's power is definitely crumbling. We saw the witch feeling very sadly threatened at the end of our last session, and so now we're going to switch gears a little bit and see Aslan's people and what they're like. All right, so let's get into it. First, we see a very different reaction to spring from the Aslan crowd than we saw from the White Witch. Remember how the White Witch responded in anger and cruelty and fear? Let's see how the beavers and the children respond to spring. While the dwarf and the White Witch were saying this, miles away the beavers and the children were walking on hour after hour into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago they had left the coats behind them, and by now they had even stopped saying to one another, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I say, bluebells," or "What was that lovely smell?" or "Just listen to that thrush." They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight, into cool green thickets, and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant, and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. So we see the children here being able to enjoy the coming of spring in community. They are available to notice the details. They know the names of the flowers and the birds, and they're noticing the smells, and they feel like they're in a delicious dream. So that's not at all Edmund's experience. So Edmund was noticing slowly the coming of spring, but he had to keep it all inside him, or else he could have been hurt by the witch, right? We've seen her hurt people before when she feels threatened. She definitely hurt the dwarf when he noticed that it was spring. But the children, Peter, Susan, Lucy, with the beavers, are able to enjoy this beautiful thing together. So not only do we see the difference between joy and despair between Edmund and the others, but we also see community and loneliness. So it's not just joy, it's that you're able to enjoy something together in the coming of spring. So I just wanted to highlight that difference before we get into the second one. So we remember how weary, how tired Edmund has been. Now let's look at how the children are feeling. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. So the witch knew that the coming of spring would happen when Aslan came. But the children weren't really sure how this would play out, right? They haven't been Narnians for a long time. They don't know exactly what Aslan coming back would look like, but now they realize that spring, real spring, actual spring, has a lot to do with it. But they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they didn't hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rests, and longer ones. So a big part of spring coming for the children is rest. So they have community, they have joy, and they have rest. The thing that is giving them strength and rest is the same thing that's taking away the witch's power. The witch can't use her sleigh anymore, and that was one advantage she had over them. Spring came, she can't use her sleigh, her power is crumbling in more ways than one. And so we see the power shifting, or at least visibly shifting, from the witch to the children. They're able to rest and enjoy the springtime and what it's doing for them. And they also have, again, another assurance that they're hoping in the right thing. Spring did come. So Father Christmas came, and now spring came too. So that's even more power to keep going. Now they finally get to the stone table. After chapters and chapters of traveling and weariness and rest and meeting interesting people along the way, they come to journey's end, to the stone table. There, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, "the sea!" In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. All right, so they come to the stone table at long last, which is where Aslan said he would meet them. On the stone table, there are carvings of old letters they couldn't read, but those letters still had an effect on them. They got a curious feeling. So we are not going to be able to get into that this session, but next session we're going to be talking a lot about the stone table and its meaning. So keep this slide in mind and hold it until next session. So they didn't come to see the stone table though, right? They came to see Aslan. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. So amidst this power, this curious feeling from the stone table and its writings, and hearing what felt like music, there was music in the air, they get to turn around and see who they had come to see. And that's Aslan, of course, right? We know that. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves around him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women there and well women, so those are dryads and naiads, as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they who had made the music. There were 4 great centaurs. The horse part of them was like huge English farm horses, and the man part was like stern but beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn, and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican, and an eagle, and a great dog. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown, and the other his standard. So Aslan is surrounded by people who are making music, who are helping him, who are involved with him. They are all looking at him and enjoying that he is there, because the creatures again are surrounded. They're circling him in a half moon style, and they're all focused on him, but also expressing themselves in very, very happy ways, like with the music, or the 2 leopards. That they're, of course, they're very royal. If Aslan is a lion and he's the king, then leopards, those, if you're thinking in order, leopards are pretty close to lions, but they're not quite, but they're high up there, right? So it makes sense that leopards are carrying his crown and his standard, so that his standard is like his sign, his flag. So what is this reminding you of? Aslan is surrounded by a lot of people who are serving him. If he is the king and he's surrounded by people, what is the Stone Table Hilltop sounding like to you? Any guesses? I'd love to hear from you, and we'll get back to that in a moment. All right. How does what surrounds Aslan compare to what surrounds the White Witch, though? Who is Aslan with versus who is the White Witch? Oh, okay, here, Jubilee is asking a question. What is a standard? Yes, a standard is like a person's flag or sign that represents who they are. So if a king is going out into battle and has his standard high, that means that he's waving his sign in the air so that all his army can see who they are, who he is, and all of the enemies can also see who they are. It's like your identifying mark that you're waving in the air. It's like staking something in the ground and saying, "Here I am," and it's moving with you. So Aslan has a special standard that we get described for us later on. It's a red lion, but it's, yeah, so it's a picture that you show to everybody that identifies who you are, especially in the context of a court or a battle or a kingdom, right? So, and that's another clue as to what's going on here. Aslan is surrounded by a lot of living creatures, right? They're making music, they're carrying things for him, they're looking at him, they're talking. How does that compare to the people who are around the White Witch? Let's think back in the story. Who really has been around the White Witch? We've seen Edmund, of course. We've seen the wolf. We've seen the dwarf. And we have seen... What does the White Witch do to people? She waves her wand and turns them into stone, right? So the White Witch is surrounding herself by things that she has turned into stone. Rather than making the people around her alive, she freezes them. She makes them dead. And these are the people that the White Witch surrounds herself with. She uses the people whom she keeps alive, and she basically kills everyone else. Compare that very sad and useless picture to Aslan, who, when people come to him, they want to make music and surround him and be with him and honor him and help him. These are people who are alive and who are free and excited. So we again see this difference between Aslan and the White Witch. Based on what we have talked about so far, think about, and if you want to type into the question box, think about why the White Witch is surrounding herself with those sorts of people. Why does she freeze people? Why does she only keep the people alive around her who do exactly what she wants in a very using sort of way? What is it about the White Witch that makes her unable to deal with people as they are versus Aslan? What is it about Aslan that makes the people around him come more to life than they were even before they saw him? All right, Aslan the lion, right? We've seen the White Witch as the Queen of Narnia, but now we're seeing Aslan in the middle of a crowd of Narnians. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembling. All right. Right, Jubilee. Jubilee's answering my question about the difference between the White Witch and Aslan. She's saying that the White Witch wants control, and she only sees the people around her as being used and not as a tool and nothing more. Exactly. She is not seeing the value of people and she's just seeing them as tools. So it doesn't matter to her if they're turned into stone or not. But as we are going to see with Aslan, he doesn't treat people this way. He doesn't view people this way. He sees them as unique and special individuals who have a life and something to bring. And the way we see this play out is quite astounding. So let's go back to Aslan and see the beginnings of his character. Why does he treat the people around him differently? First, let's look at that sentence. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. Now let's think back to a previous session when we were first introducing Aslan. Remember how we were saying he is strong and good, or he's not a tame lion, he's not safe, but he's good? This is C.S. Lewis restating all of that. Aslan is powerful and he is not tame. He is not safe. He can do whatever he wants and he has the power to carry it out. And so in this sense, he's terrible. He's majestic and just full of power. But he's good, right? So when Aslan does whatever he wants, he's only going to do what is good because goodness is part of his character. And that's how something can be good and terrible at the same time. His whole power is joined to this goodness that's a part of him. And so he is trustworthy. He's somebody that the children have been able to rightly hope in, right? Because he has the power to do what he says he's going to do. And he has the goodness to make sure that what he says about himself is right, is good, isn't cruel or wrong like the White Witch. So they get to see his golden mane and his face, and they see that it's great, it's royal, it's solemn, he's overwhelming. And we see that word solemn again, right? This kind of awe in front of something majestic, and it's a serious thing, but it's not a bad kind of serious. It's this overwhelming realization of how important and amazing something is. So that's how the children feel when they see Aslan. But they also know, as soon as they see him, that he truly is as good as they have heard. And of course, up till now, they've already seen Aslan keeping his promises, right? Spring is here. Father Christmas came. The prophecy is coming true. And if you can think of any other ways that the prophecy has come true so far, go ahead and type them in the question box because I might have missed some of them. All right. So in front of all of that majesty, remember we have Peter, Susan, and Lucy coming with the beavers to approach Aslan. They see Aslan, they're walking up to him. And after overcoming a bit of their fear, they see his goodness and start talking to him. Peter starts off, right, because he's the oldest. But after talking, Aslan asks, "But where is the fourth?" Remember, because Edmund isn't there. Edmund is stuck with the White Witch. And just notice that Aslan knows that there are 4, not 3 children. Aslan knows these things, and he asks about Edmund. Do you think that's, if Aslan knew about Edmund, do you think that he'd care about someone who had betrayed him, someone who had, for all he knew, given Aslan over to the White Witch, who had completely abandoned his siblings, who had turned traitor just for Turkish delight? Do you think that someone that amazing, someone like Aslan, would even care to ask about Edmund? Do you think that you, if you were that powerful and that good, would be able to even consider asking about someone who had betrayed, someone so small, who had betrayed so in such a huge way? And yet we see Aslan doing exactly that. He remembers Edmund. He has tried to betray them and joined the White Witch, O Aslan, said Mr. Beaver. And then Something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." And Aslan said nothing either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. So, remember way back when the children first entered Narnia, the four of them for the first time, how Lucy and Peter had reconciled and they were able to get on with their relationship well, but Peter and Edmund did not do that sort of reconciliation? Here we're beginning to see the start of what could be a reconciliation, because Peter takes responsibility for what he did wrong. Look at what he says. "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." Peter makes no excuses for his behavior. He realizes that he did not behave well towards Edmund. He did not treat him like a brother or like a person who had any value. He was just angry at Edmund for what he had done. But notice, does Peter try to excuse Edmund? No. When Peter apologizes for what he's done, he's not saying that Edmund is then fine, that it's not that what Edmund has done wrong suddenly doesn't matter. No, Edmund has done things wrong, and Peter recognizes that. The fact that Peter is apologizing for what Peter has done wrong doesn't mean that Edmund hasn't done any wrong at all. But Peter takes the stand, realizes in front of Aslan, wow, Aslan is this great, good character, and I've realized that I haven't lived up to that great, good character. I was angry with Edmund when I shouldn't have been. And he takes responsibility for that. If you were to come before a big king and you were overwhelmed by his goodness and power, do you think that the first thing you would do is say, "Hey, I did something wrong. Hi, king, you're amazing. You're great. Look, this is the bad thing I did to my sister yesterday"? No, that's a little strange, right? But that's the sort of reaction that Aslan gets. As we have seen, C.S. Lewis has already mentioned his eyes a few times, right? They're solemn, they're overwhelming, they're unchanging on this slide. Aslan knows pretty much everything, and it's like he can see into you. And I think Peter was a little bit overwhelmed in a good sort of way. Coming before Aslan, he got clarity about himself. Now, we have seen that Peter was beginning to already feel sorry for Edmund and still treat him like a brother, but now that he's before Aslan, in front of Aslan, he sees it all. Like, this is what I did wrong. And that probably didn't help Edmund. That probably pushed him to go the wrong way instead of pull him to go the right way with me. And Aslan's response to that is just to look at him, to keep looking at him with those unchanging eyes. He doesn't throw Peter out, and he doesn't say, "Oh, it doesn't matter, Peter." He just keeps Peter there, accepting Peter's apology, but not casting Peter out because of what Peter did wrong. So I think that's a really neat relationship that Peter and Aslan start to have. It's based on this truth about where each other is. Peter did something wrong, but Aslan is seeing that Peter realizes that, and that's a good basis for them to go forward. All right, we have a question. Why did Aslan ask Peter about Edmund, even though he knew what happened to Edmund and what he chose? Yeah, good question, Jubilee. I think so far we've seen the importance of truth and goodness, right? So Lucy has been honest. Peter is becoming more and more honest, and he started pretty much honest anyway. Mr. Beaver has been honest. Mr. Tumnus has come to be honest. So coming to an agreement with the truth has been really important in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think that Aslan was asking to see what the children would say about their brother. Would Peter come to realize the truth about the way that he has treated Edmund. Which he did. Peter came to realize that he didn't do everything exactly right with Edmund. But Peter needed to realize that. And so Aslan, I think by asking this question, where is Edmund, provided Peter the opportunity in front of Aslan to come to understand what Peter did so that he could ask for forgiveness for that. He could apologize. He could recognize what he did wrong and then be different from then on. So, because Peter, for what it's about to happen in this chapter, remember, this chapter is about the lion and the knight, right? So Peter's going to do something in this chapter. Before then, Peter needed to come to a full understanding of who he as Peter is. And realizing what he did to Edmund is a big part of that. So Aslan always wants his people to be in agreement with the truth. He wants them to agree with what is right and what is true. So that's the first reason, I think. Aslan was providing an opportunity for that. But I think also, like what I was saying earlier, Aslan is showing a special sort of care for people that the White Witch never, ever shows. Aslan knows that there should be a fourth brother there, and he's not there, and that's not right. Remember, Aslan is supposed to be bringing spring, bringing redemption. Wrong will be right, right? That's what the prophecy says. Well, it's wrong that Edmund isn't there. Edmund should be there. It's only right if Edmund is there. So Aslan is part of his job to make sure that what's wrong about this scenario becomes right. So he's pointing out, hey, there's something wrong here. And that's kind of a hope that he's going to fix it. It's a hint that, hey, Aslan knows, Aslan cares, Aslan knows and Aslan cares, and he's going to do something about it. But we won't see that in this chapter. We'll have to get to that in the next session. So does that answer your question, Jubilee? We'll move on. See? Please, Aslan, said Lucy, can anything be done to save Edmund? All shall be done, said Aslan, but it may be harder than you think. And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them, and said, Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them. All right, so we see exactly an answer to Jubilee's question. Why did Aslan ask about Edmund? Lucy comes, remember, she's this kind, caring, honest person. She wants to see if there's a way to save Edmund. That's why they've come to the stone table at all. Aslan has an answer ready for her. He promises all shall be done. It's going to be harder than they think. They're part of a huge story, these children, that they don't begin to understand yet. But Aslan promises, yeah, this is going to be done. It's part of my job as Aslan to make sure that wrong becomes right, that Edmund joins them. And now look at Lucy's observation of Aslan. She sees how royal and strong and peaceful he looks. But she also sees that he is a bit sad. And this is really important for us to understand about Aslan. He may be perfectly good and perfectly powerful, but he still cares, right? Those things are not opposed to each other. If you're good and you're strong, that doesn't mean that you don't care about people, that you treat them like they're worthless. That means that you treat them like they are worth something, that you need to care about them. And Aslan is the perfect example of that. Even though Edmund has done what he has done, he is still sad over the fact that things are not as they should be. Wrong is still happening, and that makes Aslan sad. He's emotional about this. And so Aslan, we keep learning, is a really complicated character. Not complicated in a bad way, but complex. He has a lot of sides to him that all fit together perfectly. but it's still really neat to notice all of them because they're what makes him so amazing as he is. All right, so who surrounds Aslan? We've asked this question before, but I want to concentrate on it one more time before we move on. Aslan is surrounded by people who are not only alive and free and making music and serving, but they're also people who are always brought to what is right and what is good and what is caring. So they're all beginning to act more and more like Aslan the more time they spend with Aslan. They're happy, they get sad over things that are wrong, they admit when they are wrong, like Peter just did, and they care about people who have done them wrong, like Lucy is showing, right? So they're full of Aslan is surrounded by people who trust him because of who he is, and then also they start to act like he does. And it's a very, very happy scene, right? It's a caring, giving, kind scene. I wonder if we would do the same thing if we were betrayed like someone like Edmund, by someone like Edmund. Would we be this concerned about him? Do you think a great king would be that concerned about someone so small who had betrayed him, like Aslan is concerned about Edmund? Would you or would I even think to figure out what we had done wrong in a situation like that? If someone had betrayed us, would we be like Peter and say, hey, I didn't behave perfectly in that situation either. That other person may be wrong, but I sure didn't do the right thing. This is a sort of honesty that the people around Aslan show. And this is, of course, totally unlike the White Witch, right? Edmund is as deceitful and cruel as the White Witch is. We've begun to see him change a little bit, right? But for most of the story, he's been acting just like the White Witch. The dwarves have acted like the White Witch. And then the people who don't go along with it, like the people who are celebrating Father Christmas's feast, they get turned into stone. There is zero opportunity for people around the White Witch to be this kind and this happy and free and joyful and honest. You can't be that around the White Witch. But around Aslan, he helps you be that. And he encourages that with his strength, with his eyes, with his truth, with his openness, and with his questions. So we see two very different crowds. We have looked at the Queen's Court, which is mostly stone statues, and now we're answering that first question. We have been able to see Aslan's court, right? Because Aslan is coming as a king, and these are his courtiers, and this is his courtroom. The stone table is his courtroom. And it's a very, very joyful, restful scene. It's enlightening, and it's a good place to be, right? So here we have a picture of that. This is Aslan's courtroom. If you have any questions about what we've just talked about, feel free to type it in the question box and I'll answer it as we go. But I just wanted to highlight that difference between the White Witch, who she is, and how that affects everybody around her, versus Aslan, who he is, and how that affects everybody around him. So that's the first part. Let's take a step back now and think about Peter. We've just seen Peter come to a moment of honesty about himself in front of Aslan. He has approached Aslan, and Aslan has drawn out of him the truth. Yes, Aslan, I did not treat Edmund the way that I should have, and I apologize for that. And now Aslan has accepted him, and Peter's ready to do something, right? So let's look at Peter. When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of the castle where you are to be king." Now, what do you think you would think if a king came up and told you, you're going to be king? That's completely overwhelming. So Peter follows. With his sword still drawn in his hand, he went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There, a beautiful sight met their eyes. And there was a castle. And of course, the sunlight was reflected from all the windows, which looked toward Peter and the sunset. But to Peter, this castle looked like a great star resting on the seashore. So Aslan, after coming to this right relationship with Peter, or rather, after Peter coming to a right relationship with Aslan, by coming to an honest assessment of who he is, Aslan draws him. He doesn't push Peter away for having done something wrong. He draws him in closer and takes him to the edge of a cliff to look over the castle of Cair Paravel, which is where Aslan tells him, "You're going to be king here." So instead of pushing Peter away, he makes him a king, or says that he will be king. So Aslan is preparing Peter for something. And we'll keep going. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel of the 4 thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over all the rest." And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. All right, we've just seen Peter go through a tremendous experience. He has just been told that he is going to be king, and he has just been shown the castle that's going to be his. But he doesn't get to rest there, right? If we were told, "Oh, you're going to be a queen or you're going to be a king and here's your castle," we might be tempted to be like, "Oh, yay, I'm going to be a queen. I'm going to be a king. Let's enjoy this," right? But C.S. Lewis doesn't let us stop there. He is about to show us what being a king is really all about. So, what did they hear? They heard a strange noise, and it was like a bugle but richer. What do you think this noise is? I'll have to move on to the next slide, but I wonder if you can guess. Here is the castle. This is Cair Paravel. This is what Peter saw when he looked across the way. This is where he is supposed to be king according to the prophecy. So we've seen Peter told he's going to be a king, but let's look at him now. "It's your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low as to be almost a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs," he did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. All right. What did Aslan just tell Peter? That he's going to be king, right? That's the prophecy. He saw the castle. It's as good as done, right? Because most of what Aslan has said has come true. Do you think that Peter gets to rest? No. Aslan, okay, here's a good question. Is Aslan strong? Yeah. Is he good? Yes. We've seen that he can do what he wants. Why doesn't Aslan respond to Susan's horn? Because we've heard just Susan's horn just now. That's the thing that sounded like a bugle but richer. Why is it important, do you think, that Aslan makes Peter respond to his sister's horn? There's a bit of a hint here in the slide. Peter heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back, let the prince win his spurs." So something clicks for Peter, and he runs towards whatever the danger is. This is a longer one. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. All right, so we'll pause there. Because just to recap what has happened, Peter rushes in. He sees the terrible sight, and it's the wolf. The chief of police has finally caught up with everybody at the stone table. Moghrim, the same person who arrested Mr. Tumnus, and the same wolf that the White Witch told to go kill everybody. Moghrim is here, and he's attacking Susan, and that's why her horn rang out for help. So Peter is rushing in to save Susan, but he doesn't feel brave. He feels sick. He doesn't feel up to the task. He does not like what he needs to do, but that makes no difference. How he feels makes no difference when he realizes what he needs to do, which is, of course, rescue his sister. We have a question to explain winning his spurs. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a phrase we don't really use anymore. But basically, the point of the phrase is that the person has to earn his position. We have just seen Peter told he's going to be king, right? But he has to earn that position too. He's been given that position, but he also needs to act like he's going to be king, right? So that's the importance of Aslan not responding to the horn. He tells Peter softly, purring, right? Remember? Hey, you need to go do this, Peter. You're king now. This is your job, or you're supposed to be king. So this is part of what you're supposed to do. Peter is now on a process towards becoming king, towards showing that he's ready to be king, or that he knows how to be king, and Aslan is letting him go through that process. He's showing him that process. That's what Aslan meant by let the prince win his spurs. Peter needs to earn this position, not just be given it. So we see what this looks like. Does it look like Peter being, oh, I can do this? No, Peter doesn't feel brave. He feels sick. But what matters is that he does the right thing anyway. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned round, its eyes flaming and its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had a howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it, and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. So Peter just rescued his sister. Peter killed the wolf, who was going to try to destroy everybody there. Do you think Peter earned his spurs, won his spurs? Yeah, he was able to do the right thing anyway. Now, here's a question. Did Peter win his spurs because he went in and did everything perfectly? Or did he win his spurs because he did the right thing even when it was hard, right? If we read this paragraph, it's describing the battle, which of course is very, very action-oriented, and there's a lot happening, and it's bloody, and it's not very pleasant. But did Peter do everything perfectly? No, he missed his first strike. He wasn't sure exactly what he was doing, but all he could think, and he wasn't feeling well. He felt like he was sick, and by the end of it, he's exhausted. So it's not like he's this champ coming in, I'm going to do this, and it's so easy. No, he only kept going for one reason, because he knew it was the right thing to do. And that is what true courage is. C.S. Lewis says this in a lot of his different works, but basically it's communicating the idea that courage isn't not being afraid, but it's keeping on doing the right thing anyway. So that's what Peter has done. And that's part of why he's won his spurs. Aslan cares about doing the right thing anyway. So here we see that. And then after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides. But in Narnia, no one thinks any the worse of you for that. So here's something very, very important that we need to learn from when it comes to what Peter did with the wolf. Yeah, he killed the wolf. He was a hero in that he was protecting people, and he did this thing. But Peter didn't go kill the wolf just for the sake of killing the wolf at all. In fact, he would rather have not. C.S. Lewis in Narnia doesn't make this sort of behavior light, or yeah, you don't just go beating people up. You don't want to be violent. Peter didn't want to do this, but he had to protect his people, and he had to do the right thing. And that wolf was a monster and was going to kill the people around him, specifically Susan. So when you're in Narnia doing something like this, what is really courageous is not how good you are at fighting someone, but what you do to do the right thing. And Peter was doing the right thing, and afterwards he was tired, he was sick, and he cared about Susan. That's what this sentence is showing. They were kissing and they were crying. They were glad that they were alive. This was a very life-centered thing, that Susan is alive, and she's glad Peter is alive, and the rest of the people are protected. And so this sort of emotion, even from a warrior, is something that Narnians are fine with, right? We do not have to be steel-hearted people who just go around being mean. Absolutely not. That's not Narnian courage at all. Narnian courage is not brute strength. Narnian courage is being strong when you need to for the right reason, even if you don't want to or don't feel like it or don't feel up to the task. Peter didn't want to, Peter didn't feel like it, and he didn't think he was up to the task, but he knew what the right thing was, and that was the only thing pulling him forward. And by the end of it, he was just relieved that it was over and that everyone was all right. And that's the sort of courage that Narnia supports. And that's the sort of courage that we should support too, not just brute, mindless strength, but a loving use of strength in order to do the right thing and nothing more. So, earning his spurs. When you win your spurs, you are showing that you are ready for a task. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. You have forgotten to clean your sword, said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam, said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword. Okay, so Peter has what's happened in this scene. When you're winning your spurs, do we know what spurs are? They are used by horse riders to get a horse to move forward, right? So you have to know how to use spurs very well and carefully, because if you use them the wrong way, the horse can go out of control. I may or may not have done that once. So when you are winning your spurs, you're showing not only that you have strength and skill, but that you have the wisdom to know how to guide a horse. So that was the whole point of Aslan telling Peter, go fight the wolf, go protect your people. What's a horseman? Or think back to the medieval ages. We've heard of all of the medieval stories of the lords and ladies, knights, right? The knights were the horsemen of that time. And C.S. Lewis is taking a lot of ideas and pictures from that sort of culture and bringing them into the story. So what's happened here is that Peter has just been knighted by Aslan. So let's take a step back and think, what has happened to Peter in this chapter? He has come to a right realization of himself and so he's agreed with the truth about who he is, and he has become a better person by aligning himself with what is good, right? So first, Peter's grown in character. Then Aslan has told him that he's going to be king. But then he's been set his first trial, and that's killing the wolf, to show that he knows how to use strength for the good and only for the good. And that's what's happened here. He's won his spurs by showing that he has the wisdom to do the right thing with the power he's been given. He used the tools that Father Christmas gave him, the sword and the shield, for the right thing instead of the wrong thing, right? He could have used the sword and shield to hurt people, but instead he used it to protect people. And he showed that he could harness his strength. He was wise. That's how he won his spurs, and that's why Aslan is able to knight him. Now, again, going back to this medieval idea, there's this whole structure in the medieval feudal culture system and just in the court system itself where a knight is kind of up on the road to becoming king. So on top of everything we've just seen about Peter's growth, we're also seeing that Aslan is promoting him, so to speak, towards becoming king. But it's going to involve more than just this trial to get Peter where he needs to be. So let's go back to first that big picture question of who is Aslan surrounding himself by and who is the White Witch surrounding herself by. We've seen the White Witch. Thinking of Aslan, thinking of that question, who is surrounding Aslan? We've answered that on a larger scale. He has his court. There are people who are happy and free and valued and joyful, but there are also people who change into better people, into truer people. And that's exactly what we've seen happen with Peter here. He's just gone through a huge growth process through this whole chapter of becoming a person who is good and true and strong and wise. And so that's how he has become a knight by the end of this chapter. So that's what happens to the people around Aslan. You'll see this with all of the characters. Any character in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that we get a close look at, like Peter or like Lucy or Susan or Edmund, we're going to see that as they come closer to Aslan, they become better people. And Peter, this chapter, I wanted to focus on it because it's the perfect picture of that with Peter. And since Peter is such an important character, it was worth talking through. But as we keep reading, I want you to be thinking about this. How are the other people growing around Aslan? All right. But let's not forget Edmund, right? We've seen Peter's growth. Specifically about Edmund, that he's realized the way he treated Edmund was not right. So let's go back to Edmund. Let's not forget him, the way that Aslan didn't forget him. Quick, quick, shouted the voice of Aslan. Centaurs, eagles, I see another wolf in the thickets. There, behind you. He has just started away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam. And instantly, with a thunder of hoofs and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Yes, Aslan sends his people into the darkness in order to what? What's the word that he used? Rescue the fourth son of Adam. Aslan is rescuing Edmund despite everything. Aslan has promised to do the right thing, to make what is wrong right. Remember, that's the prophecy. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. So he is willing to do the right thing no matter the way that Edmund has treated him. And in a way, that's a bigger picture of what Peter has just done. He's had to face his own fears. He's had to get past hard things in order to do the right thing. He's had to run into battle and take care of his sister. Aslan is doing the same thing. he is willing to go and rescue the fourth son of Adam because that's the right thing to do, even though Edmund has betrayed him so horribly. So he's willing to go into the gathering darkness in order to make wrong right, in order to keep his promise. So that's the sort of Aslan that we're getting to see, and that's the sort of Aslan we'll get to know, especially in the upcoming chapters. So keep that in mind. That's going to be pretty important. That's a very important character trait for Aslan. Because remember, this story is all about this prophecy. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death, and when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. So Aslan is the one who is doing all these things, and he's the one keeping his promises. So in the upcoming sessions, let's see how that keeps playing out. Because, excuse me, in the next session, we get to see some deep magic. And you'll see that's the stone table. So let's see what all of that is about. All right, we're going to finish up right on time, I think. Sorry if I can stop coughing. So yes, thanks for tuning in to this Signum Academy session. We do want to know more about your camp, so if you haven't already, just send us an email to academy@signumu.org about what you're doing with your camps, how many people are there, and any suggestions you have for us. If you have any questions too, if any of your learners have any questions, send those along to the same email and I'll reply. And then also check us out at signumuniversity.org for any further information you might want. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next session. Bye.